I wanted to share my story with you in the hopes of finding some like minded people, those that may understand what I experienced more than I do. I'm not someone who believes in the paranormal stuff, nor am I religious. I'm a software developer, so I tend to approach things logically, and I generally look for rational explanations for just about everything. But there was something that happened to me as a child that I've never been able to fully explain, and being the person that I am, it's one of those itches I can't scratch. So, it tends to live rent-free in my mind, showing itself at odd times for me to think on it more, and part of me wonders if there is something more to it. From as early as I can remember, until about the age of 12, I had this same recurring nightmare, at least twice a week. It was always the exact same, too. I would find myself in an extremely cramped, enclosed space, like being inside of a metal box, barely big enough for my body. I could see out through what seemed like a very small and thick window, but everything outside was dark, like it was always nighttime. But the area around me, wherever I was, seemed very advanced and technological somehow. There were a lot of switches and panels around me, but I remember reaching for them and knowing exactly what they were and what they did. While the panels weren't daunting to me, it was the claustrophobic feeling that I always paid too much attention to. I would see the panels and be fine, but then I almost felt like I couldn't breathe when I realized how small of an area I was actually in. Then, the nightmare would always end the same way. There would be this sudden flash of orange light outside the window, followed immediately by this intense heat that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I remember feeling like I was being burned alive. It was that bad. Then I would wake up screaming and drenched in sweat. I remember having these dreams before I even really talked, so it was so hard to explain how I felt to my parents. I just let them hold and comfort me and tell me that I must have had a bad dream. And that's what I led myself to believe as well. But this nightmare was always so incredibly vivid and terrifying that waking up screaming became a normal routine. And I even had accidents in my bed sometimes. My parents even took me to a child psychologist. I was their first kid, so I think they took everything that could possibly be wrong with me very seriously. Unfortunately, they weren't much help. And they told my parents to restrict what I ate or drank a few hours before bed. They gave me a Benadryl, which, yes, helped me fall asleep faster, but the nightmares were always there. They happened so often, and were so consistent that I could describe every detail of the cramped space, down to the texture of the wall and the feeling of being strapped in somehow. When I was able to talk a bit more fluently, I tried explaining to my parents what it was about. I know they were expecting me to say that I saw a monster, or I was falling, or something you would expect a kid to have nightmares about, but by the look on their face, I could tell that they didn't know what to think of my description. The nightmares continued throughout elementary school, but I learned to cope with them to some extent. I rarely woke up screaming and crying like I used to, but I was still jolted awake and drenched in sweat. I would have to look around and remind myself that it was just a dream. However, it didn't make them less intense or frequent. I just remember being so frustrated because I was too embarrassed to stay at any friends' houses, afraid that I may wake up from a nightmare and be made fun of. Then, in 6th grade, our science teacher was doing a unit on the history of space exploration. I was looking forward to this because I had a weird love-hate thing for space and space travel and astronomy. It fascinated me. I loved using the cheap little telescope that I had bought with my birthday money to look at the stars. I even had a little book that helped locate and identify the larger stars. But at the same time, if I spent too much time stargazing, I would get this existential dread creeping up on me, and I would have to do something else to distract my brain. And I had no idea why it was happening. Anyway, for our space unit, the focus was mainly on successful missions. Mercury, Gemini, the moon landings, and we even watched a documentary on it. But she also covered some of the setbacks and disasters, explaining how they shaped and changed what we know, and to put it basically, how we learned from our mistakes. One of the tragedies that she brought up was Apollo 1. Something immediately felt different when she showed the pictures of the craft and those 3 astronauts, Grissom, White, and Chaffee. She explained how, while they were doing routine tests in their command module, a fire broke out in the cabin. The spacecraft was filled with pure oxygen, which caused the fire to spread incredibly quick. The tragic part of this was that they couldn't escape. The hatch design made it impossible for them to open it quickly from the inside. And sadly, they all perished there. She went over this and how this taught them that the hatch was not safe and caused them to redesign it so that it opened outwards. I remember the mix of emotions I felt as we discussed this. I felt incredibly sad for those astronauts and overwhelmed with this feeling of guilt and remorse, and I didn't understand why. That night, I went home and asked my parents to go to the library over the weekend. There was no assignment for us surrounding it, but something just pulled me to it, telling me to look into it myself. This was the early 2000s, so we didn't have a computer with internet to just look it up freely like today. So, that Saturday, we went to the library and I tried to get some books and an encyclopedia to read as much information about it as I could. And somewhere in all the information I read, I saw something that triggered something in my mind. I read the final transmissions as one of them said, "We're burning up." I didn't mention this earlier, but in my dreams, I kept hearing that. Right toward the end, right before I would wake up, I could hear it, like I was thinking it. We're burning up. What the hell did any of this mean to me? I started getting that same feeling when I watched the stars too long and had to put everything back. I remember telling my dad I wanted to leave, and he asked me if I was okay, saying I looked like I was about to be sick. I told him that was why I wanted to leave, but didn't explain what I had found. We went home, and I went to play with my younger brother, and tried to completely forget about what I read, not wanting to think about it. But then, that night, I slept peacefully, not waking up once. That was fine. I didn't have the nightmare every night, but then the next night, and the next 2 weeks, and then a month passed by, and not a single nightmare. I was sleeping through the nights, and if I dreamt at all, they were just normal dreams that I would expect a kid to dream about. It is now 2025, and I have not had that nightmare since. Now, I had something new to think about. Was it related? Did I see or read something that caused the nightmares to stop? I thought it was just some irrational fear of small spaces, the dark, and maybe even fire, but is there more to it? Like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm not a religious person. My family never has been, and I certainly didn't know anything about past lives as a kid, and I even feel silly for asking this, but could that be what I experienced? Was I having flashbacks of a life previously lived? Was I experiencing their final moments, and did researching it give me or them some kind of closure as to what happened? I don't want to claim that I was one of those astronauts, because part of me feels like that might be insulting to their memory. Those guys were real people with families, and documented lives that had nothing to do with me or my family line. I did my best to look into that too. But the idea that consciousness somehow transfers from one person to another is the only thing that is making any sense to me. Since then, I've told my therapist, my now fiancé, and you about my experience, which is why I'll keep my real name out of this. But I felt the need to share it. I'm not looking to be convinced of reincarnation or anything like that. I'm just trying to understand this experience that has puzzled me for decades. I'm more open to hearing about people's experiences like this because it makes me feel less alone, but part of me is still torn. Was it really related? Or was it just a coincidence that they stopped? I don't think I'll ever find out. At least, not in this lifetime. I recently stumbled upon your YouTube channel. What a great find. I recently retired and am working on various projects, and I like a little listening background. Thank you for your exceptional narrations. Thank you kindly for listening. When my son Aaron was 3 years old, we would take nightly walks around the neighborhood when the weather permitted. One lovely spring evening, we were walking up a hill on a route that we had not taken for a long time. Aaron was a chatterbox from the time he was 11 months old, speaking in clear sentences. As we were ascending the hill, we were chatting about the buds on the trees as we passed them. I explained to him that that was a sign that summer would be here soon. As we topped the hill, he paused and pointed to a neatly spaced row of pine trees by an early 1900s-era house. He said, "I planted those trees when I was John." I was thinking, what? And I said, "I'm not sure that I heard you. What did you say?" He pointed again to the trees and started walking in the direction that he was pointing and said, "Mama, I planted those trees when I was John." He turned and looked me in the eye. He then said, "They grew up nice." I said, "Yeah, that was a great job," my heart thumping as if I'd seen a ghost. We started walking again, and he randomly said, "We needed a windbreak." I said, "Pardon?" And he explained, "I planted those trees because we needed something to break up the wind on the top of this hill." I remember cocking my head, smiling and looking at him like a dog who's trying to decode an unfamiliar word or expression and said, "Wow, that was a great idea." In my head, I'm wondering how I could be hearing what I'm hearing. We then turned and started for home, and he started asking about hot chocolate. I never mentioned the trees or John to him again, and I kind of skirted around that route on our evening walks, until one evening a few weeks later, as we were preparing for our walk, he said, "Let's go check on the trees." I hesitated and said, "Okay, we'll go see how far out the leaves are from the buds." He looked at me and laughed and said, "Not those trees, Mama. My trees. The ones I planted." And so we did. After that evening, there was no more talk of the pine trees or John. And we moved away the next year. We returned to visit family when he was about 6 or 7, and we were about to drive by those trees. He was talking about something else, and I interrupted him. It was winter, and the trees had snow on them and looked pretty. I stopped the car and pointed to the trees and said, "Don't those pine trees look pretty with snow on them?" He looked at me and said, "Mom, all trees look pretty with snow on them." So, apparently, he no longer remembered John. Hey there, don't mean to interrupt your listening experience, but if you're not subscribed to the channel, please do consider doing so. It helps tremendously. Okay, thanks, bye. As a child, I had an unusual affinity for machines and mathematics, or computer science. My dad was an English teacher and my mom was a homemaker. She would occasionally take on cleaning jobs, but otherwise she didn't work. So neither of them had a background in math or science, but they were always incredibly supportive of what they saw as my brilliant imagination or inventive mind. When I was around 6 or 7, I would draw these diagrams of some kind of machines or devices. While other kids may have been coloring or drawing these cute pictures of their families, I would take my scribbled papers to my parents and explain in near gibberish, I'm sure, what they were and what they did. They'd always look at me with curiosity and ask how I came up with this, and I remember telling them that I made it. It was my idea. I remember at the time not being able to describe it to them either, or having any idea how to explain why I knew what this was. I think they just took it as it was my drawings, and told me I did a great job on it, and we all moved on, having no idea that part of what I drew resembled real historical devices. In elementary school, I continued drawing these machines like it was a normal thing. I had an intuitive understanding of mathematics, to the point that my teachers would tell my parents that I was pretty advanced for my age. We even had this assignment where we had to, quote, invent something. We had to show the problems, our solution to said problem, and any examples or diagrams explaining how it would work and help. I had drawn this machine and explained how it could follow instructions based on what looked like cards with holes punched in specific patterns. I remember this because the teacher asked me what problem the machine was solving, and I explained how the hole-punched cards gave the machine the instructions to do whatever we asked of it. I remember getting frustrated because she was talking about how something like that already existed, and I told her that I knew because I had helped create it. I ended up getting a passing grade on it because I followed the instructions, and she agreed that I was thinking more broadly, which was unusual for our age group. At the time, I didn't know how to explain how I knew I made the machine. It made sense in my head, but I had no idea how to put it into words. My parents began to notice that whenever these old machines came up, whether it was something I may have drawn, maybe in something my dad watched, or even this old-looking computer that we saw at a yard sale, I would explain to them how it worked, and often that I knew this because I had helped create it. They thought it was just an odd way for me to explain that I knew what it was, not necessarily that I actually created it. I mean, how could a child have helped create these machines that had been around for much longer than I had? Throughout middle and high school, I maintained that passion for mathematics and computer programming. My parents were proud of my achievements, and while they didn't mind, they couldn't understand how I was so knowledgeable on mechanical systems, something that I had never studied. I know they just accepted it as part of what made me unique. It only made sense that I would major in computer science, too. When I started college, my professors often commented on my intuitive grasp of programming concepts. I also became known for asking questions about the historical development of computing that went beyond what was typically covered in coursework. Thankfully, most of my professors enjoyed it, and we would continue our discussions after class. But I think I finally got some clarity in who I was and why I was so drawn to computers during my junior year in a Women in STEM course. We had an assignment to research and write an in-depth report on either an important woman in science or one who made significant behind-the-scenes contributions to scientific advancement. The professor provided a list of suggested figures, but also said that we could choose our own subject if we had someone specific in mind. I remember scanning the list, but nothing really jumped out at me. So, I decided to do my own research. I started looking for lesser-known names that made large impacts in science, and I scrolled through link after link. I then stopped at a name that stood out to me. I clicked on her name, and as I read about her, I just had this profound moment of clarity. Her name was Ada Lovelace, and the more I researched her, the more my life seemed to make sense. She was a mathematician in the 1840s who worked with another one that became one of her friends. The thing about Ada is that she helped her friend in the creation of this analytical engine, or a type of computer. And the more I read, I learned that she had written what is now recognized as the first computer program. She was one of the first computer programmers. I learned about her vision of programmable machines that could go beyond pure calculation. She had written about machines that could compose music if given the right instructions. This is what really stood out to me. Besides my love for computer science, I'd always been fond of poetry. My parents always assumed it was because of my dad being an English teacher, and in fact, they appreciated it, especially him. The older I got, I would talk about how numbers and words were connected, and how similar they were, and while I was close to both my parents, I seemed to favor my father in his education and career, but had so much respect and love for my mother and all that she did for our family, and I always expressed my gratitude to her. As I researched deeper, I saw some of her notes and it gave me chills. The way that she organized her work on the page and some of her quick drawings and connections were so close to what I had drawn. I remember one particular drawing I made as a kid that looked almost identical to hers. I'm an only child and my parents kept just about all of my schoolwork, so I'm still trying to find it between all the folders and tubs in their basement, but once I find it, I will share it too. But then I learned that a lot of her contributions had been shadowed or overlooked by her male colleagues during her lifetime. Her friend, Charles Babbage, who she worked on the analytical machine with, took full credit for it, claiming that she had very little to do with it, even though her algorithms and insight were crucial to making this machine actually functional. I found myself becoming angry as I read more about her and the controversy, and I knew that it was all wrong and that she did not get the recognition she deserved. I threw myself into this report, and as I did, I found myself writing with a level of passion and personal connection that surprised even me. I had to stop myself because I noticed several times in the report that I would put I instead of Ada, and I remember just staring at the sentence for the longest time. Why did I put that? Then I started thinking about everything I knew, everything I drew as a child, my passion for this machine that I'd never even seen before but somehow knew what it was and what it did. What if I was Ada in a past life? What if that's why I became so emotional reading about all the recognition that was stolen from her? I turned in my report, and a week later, my professor stopped to talk to me about it. She told me that this was the first time someone had ever written about Ada. She knew a little about her, but not much, and after my report, she even went to look into her more. She joked partially to make sure that I wasn't making it up. We talked about her for a good hour after class, and she asked me how I found her. I started explaining how I wanted to find someone in computers when I found her and was drawn to her. She asked me what I meant by that, and if I knew her somehow, like an ancestry thing, because she said I used some first-person dialogue in my paper. I apparently missed some when I went back to edit it. I told her that I didn't and swore that I didn't copy it from somewhere, but that's what I meant by being drawn to her. I felt like I knew her, even though I had only just recently learned her name. So, I explained to her my childhood drawings and interest, and how I always would say that I made those machines. But as I talked, I realized how crazy I probably sounded to her. She seemed accepting of my explanation and said that my paper was very thorough and that I did a great job on it too. Maybe she just wanted to be done with the conversation though. But that research and conversation really seemed to open the floodgates for me. Learning about her made me feel like I knew myself better. Being obsessed with computers, mathematics, and even poetry, which was something Ada also enjoyed. My relationship being so strong with my dad, much like her. It all made sense. She died at a young age due to cervical cancer, which also seems like a small connection because, well, not the same. I have PCOS. I feel like between her death and not getting the recognition she deserves, we became one, in order to give her a second chance at life. And that's how I've chosen to accept it. I recognize Ada's life and her contributions, but I also understand that this is my life now. I do still love my career and what I chose, but I also remind myself to follow other interests that I have. for both of us to experience. So, if reincarnation is real, I can confidently say that we are both living a full and happy life, exploring everything we want, and standing up for ourselves to get the credit that we deserve. With permission from my friend Casey, I wanted to share her story. She's given me some more information to add to this as well, but I think you would be interested in it. What I'm about to share is something that has been a constant part of her personality since I've known her, and according to her, it's been a part of her since she was a child. Casey has always had what can only be described as an obsession with the American frontier period, specifically the late 1800s. Not in that romanticized cowboy way that some people are drawn to the Old West, but with the day-to-day reality of frontier life, especially when it came to education. She knows obscure details about homesteading, the small one-room schoolhouses, and even the struggle of the winters. She wasn't even majoring in history or something like that. She was going for elementary schooling and education. She wanted to be a teacher. What makes this unusual is that Casey grew up in suburban Connecticut with a family that had no connection to the American West. Her parents were both from the East Coast, and her family history is entirely European immigration to New England. Yet, she's told me that she's talked about remembering life on the prairie since she was a child. I met Casey when I went to her dorm room for a study session. I was majoring in psychology, and she and I had a class together, and we bonded pretty quickly. Her side of the room looked like a small museum exhibit about frontier education. She'd collected this vintage slate board, and she had a couple old primers, and even had this really old notebook that looked like it was falling apart. She told me how she found it at some old antique store and she used it sparingly, wanting to make it last. She used it as a special scrapbook in a way, keeping small flat items in it. She was very proud of her items like that and loved showing them off. For the longest time, our friend group just thought it was a fun little obsession that she liked. We thought it was a quirky thing about her and we accepted her for it. Our friend group in college consisted of 4 of us: Casey, myself, and then our friend Gabby, who was studying religious studies, and Rosa, who was majoring in pre-med. We would often hang out in Casey's dorm room, surrounded by her old-fashioned decorated room. Her roommate was nice about it. She didn't mind her stuff, but she also typically wasn't around. She was dating someone that lived off campus, so she was there more than the dorm. Casey's choice of decorations often came up when we were hanging out, too. She would start talking about 19th century teaching techniques with such passion. That's when Casey finally shared the truth with us. One evening, during our sophomore year, we were hanging out in her room when Rosa made a joke about an old candle holder that she had. After all of us laughing, Casey said she wanted to tell us something, but made us promise that we wouldn't make fun of her. She explained that she believes she knows so much about this stuff, about the frontier, because she lived it. None of us said anything as she continued. She explained how she had these memories of teaching in a one-room schoolhouse. She explained how she dressed, how the kids dressed. She explained the window she liked to have open on the warmer days, and how it was difficult some days to keep the kids focused when there could be 8 different grade levels in one room. I remember how it turned into this huge debate between us all. Rosa was pretty skeptical, asking how that would even be possible and talking about her childhood, laughing that her dad liked to watch all those old Western movies. But Casey declined, saying no one that she could recall watched that kind of stuff. Gabby, however, was quite intrigued. She explained how reincarnation was a central belief in several major religions, explaining how souls could return in different bodies to learn and grow through multiple lifetimes. She mentioned how she was actually pretty interested in studying more on it in her class. Casey was pretty excited to hear this from Gabby, latching on pretty quickly that she believed her. She was asking her more questions about what she did know about it. I found myself somewhere in the middle. I didn't really have any experience or any reason to look into past lives, but I'd also like to think that I was more open-minded. Neither myself nor my parents were religious. I used to go to a church group as a kid, but it was more like a daycare, but that was as close to going to church as we got. I found myself just sitting back and listening for the most part, asking a question here and there. I wanted to know more about these visions. Was it something like deja vu where the memories would just randomly pop up? Could she think of them on demand? Were they just dreams? Casey explained sometimes it was like someone telling you someone's name, and it sounds familiar, but you just can't place their face. Or when a word is on the tip of your tongue, but you can't think of it. The memories sometimes came to her when she saw something that jogged her memory, like when you see a souvenir and remember when you got it. She also explained that she'd had a lot of dreams about it too, and standing at the front of the classroom, and all the kids greeting her by name. But the name she could never remember. She tried her best to remember it when she woke up to try and look into the person, but she never could. And if I'm being honest, her explanation had some validity. She knew things about frontier education that seemed to go way beyond what you could learn from books or maybe even movies. The conversation that day opened the door for Casey to share more of her specific memories over the years. She loved to share her classroom with us, and she even drew a diagram of it. It just became more a part of Casey, and we accepted it. And fast forward a little bit to spring break of our junior year. Rosa was going home to join her family in Cancun. Gabby couldn't go with us as much as she wanted to, as she was working for the college, so while she had a break from classes, she still had work to do. Casey and I, however, did end up with plans. She invited me to go with her on a road trip to Kansas and Nebraska. I teased her how our friends were going somewhere warm and fun, and her idea of a vacation was flat old Kansas. But then she explained how she was looking into visitor places that centered around the old frontier. She had found some place, a museum and historical building of a preserved schoolhouse, where you could walk around an old classroom. I could see in her face that she wanted company, and I couldn't say no. I genuinely enjoyed Casey's company, and found her passion for this infectious. So, with all teasing aside, I agreed to join her. We drove to this tiny town in central Kansas, and checked out this one-room schoolhouse that dated to 1887. I'll never forget the moment Casey walked inside that room. Her demeanor completely changed. She stood in the center of the room looking around with this intense recognition. But then she walked up to one of the students' desks and moved it. It made that loud screech sound when she did, which made me try and stop her. That's when she explained that the desks were wrong. She said that they should have been in groups. That's when someone else walked into the room with us and confirmed she was correct. She then asked Casey if she knew why, and she explained that it was so the older students could help the younger ones. She nodded in agreement and explained that she was correct, but that they had the desks arranged the way they did for a more modern viewing. As I helped Casey put the desk back to how it was, the woman asked us if we were learning about the 1800s, and then Casey took the lead. She coyly mentioned that it was something like that, and the woman went into more details about the building. She explained, or tried to explain, what the curriculum looked like, but Casey was practically finishing her sentences. Thankfully, the woman was amused by it and went with it. She had us follow her into another part of the building that was basically built on to this original building. It was like a candy store for Casey. It was filled with primers. She got excited over seeing a McGuffey reader. There was an old dress and shoes, some school papers, and tons of photos and drawings. As we looked them all over, the woman explained to us some of the history of the photos, when Casey stopped at one in particular of a woman standing in front of a building. She asked the woman if she knew who she was. She said that she was probably one of the school teachers, but that they didn't have extensive records of the people in the photos. She pulled the photo out of the display and flipped it over to the back. There was some writing there that included a date, 1889, but we couldn't quite make out the names. It was something like Walsh or maybe Washington, but part of it was missing. The woman explained that everything here was either items found by the person that bought and owned the building, or items that were donated to the building, so the information on them was limited. I just remember how intently Casey stared at that photo. I didn't know if I should have said something to her or just given her the time, but the woman noticed too. She had asked Casey if she knew the woman, or recognized her, rather, and Casey smiled at her and said something like that. She said she definitely looked familiar, like she was part of her, and the woman just smiled back at her, probably thinking we sounded crazy, I'm sure. Then, to my surprise, Casey explained to the woman how she felt connected to this way of life. She explained how she believed she used to live back then, and was trying to find details about her past life. I don't think the woman was quite on board with us, but nevertheless, she was still very kind and helpful. She showed us some other items, an old attendance book with teachers' signatures in it, and asked Casey if she recognized them at all. She once again found a signature that looked like Walsh. Then she pulled out a small notepad that she carries in her purse and immediately flipped through a few pages. What shocked me was the pages that she flipped past. I could see something in cursive being written that started with a W. It caught my attention because her name does not start with a W, not her middle nor last name. In fact, she doesn't even have a W in any of her names, so why would she have been writing it? But she flipped to an empty page and quickly scribbled out a signature, Walsh. It looked eerily similar to the one in the book. Everyone has this uniqueness to their signatures, but the way the A was slanted opposite of the W, and the hard drop on the H was damn near identical. One might think that she saw it and copied it, but even after looking at it multiple times, I tried writing it, and you could see clear differences. You can see where I paused to redo it, or was just trying from memory. Casey had no pauses. She wrote it perfectly each time. Then she showed me the previous pages, explaining how she would sit just rewriting similar names because that's all she could remember. It felt right to her, but she didn't know why. The woman seemed to find it pretty impressive too, and began asking Casey more about what she knew or remembered. We left there, I think convincing that woman that past lives were real. She gave us some options on trying to find people long gone, and where to look both locally or online. When we returned to campus, we told our friends about what we saw and found out. Even Rosa opened up to the idea just a little bit, having no explanation for the signature. Casey explained how much that trip meant to her and how she thinks that it answered some of the questions she's had for some time. She did some more research and found out more about that specific location. Unfortunately, she didn't find anyone matching that last name, so she thinks that she taught elsewhere. She feels strongly that this Walsh holds a lot of answers that she's looking for. In the meantime, we've all since graduated and have gone our own ways. Gabby and Casey still hang out as they live close, and I've seen plenty of pictures of Casey's current classroom. While she teaches elementary school, and her classroom is modern, she starts her school year the same way. And she always shows up wearing an old school teacher uniform that the kids seem to get a kick out of. She's explained how it gets them to ask questions every time. She gets to talk about schooling back then, and it's really helping her to connect with the kids. She just doesn't mention the whole past life thing. It's just a remarkable thing for me because since meeting Casey and knowing her story, I've been fascinated by past lives, reincarnation, and I watch and listen to a lot of stories on it. The fact that she still remembers this stuff as an adult is apparently not as common, and part of me wonders if that has a bigger meaning. Maybe there's something more to her story, and maybe there's a sense of closure that's needed. But at the same time, Casey also seems to be content with what she knows. And she was able to get enough information to convince herself that it could be true, and she's able to live with both lives and be happy about it. And to be honest, that's really all that matters to me. As long as it doesn't harm your current life, I think it's a special connection that someone can have with the past. Hey there. Hopefully you enjoyed this collection of past life stories. These are always very interesting stories to me. I never know what to personally think about them. Because obviously there's multiple camps in this situation, right? Like, do you believe in reincarnation? Do you believe in reliving lives from other people that have no connection to you? Do you believe in the paranormal and supernatural? It's a very broad level of... What am I trying to say here? There's a very there's a very diverse number of topics you have to believe in order to accept these. Not saying I don't accept them or think they're true or reject them or anything like that. What I'm saying is, I don't know what I think. I have my personal opinions that I don't share, for a good reason. I'm not here to proselytize? That's the wrong word in my case. I'm not here to preach my personal beliefs. That's the better way to put it. I am here to read interesting stories to you, and yes, we can get personal about things, but this, I don't think it needs to be one of them. I think we can just sit back and listen to these stories and think, wow, that's bizarre. I've mentioned in the past going to someone and trying to do some sort of past life regression, and it's still something I'm open to and interested in, because it would be kind of crazy if I had some sort of past life regression and then had a story to tell you all. I would probably just be a duck. I'm a duck. I'm joking. Sorry. I cope with humor, and whenever I don't know what to say, humor is the easiest thing for me to jump to, so. Anyways, hopefully you enjoyed the past life stories. If you did, please do hit the like button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, please consider subscribing. That'd be amazing of you to do. You can also leave me a comment with your thoughts on the stories, how to think about what to say there. Any sort of comment you want to leave is always accepted, though. I always appreciate comments. You can join Patreon or memberships to get early access to content like this and other things depending on how you sign up and what you sign up for. I'm getting ahead again. I am ahead by several days. Woo! You can submit your stories, past life or other, by going to astheravendreams.com and clicking the button to do so, or emailing them to astheravendreams@gmail.com. If you happen to go to the website, you can find other platforms where the podcast is in longer format. You can find all my social media links, find some other stuff about stories I've written, the book I wrote that some people enjoyed. Yeah. I think that's everything. If it's not, oops. Anyways, hope you're having a beautiful week so far. Hope your next week goes swimmingly. Hope I see you again here very soon. But until then, remember that you are loved, you are valid, you are important, and the best... You're the best... I feel like I'm going to sneeze. I'm not sneezing, though. Okay, sorry. You're loved, valid, and important, and the best you that you can be. Don't forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Until next time, my friends, much love, and sleep well.